Hi, welcome. My name is Joanne, and welcome to today's Challah-Cast. We've entered into the book of Shemot, which is it's the Hebrew name for the book of Exodus, and the word Shemot means names. Yes, it's the book of Exodus. It's in English, it's Exodus, but in the Hebrew, it's names, Shemot. So welcome. Today I want to talk a little bit about, as we get ready to make the challah, as it's Friday afternoon, and prepare to enter into God's sacred time of Shabbat. I want to talk a little bit about family this week and how Shabbat and God's idea of family go so beautifully together. So I want to start in the book of Exodus, because in Exodus, as we see, the sons of Jacob come down to Egypt. We have 70 souls in all, right? And it starts out with the names. Just go there. So the book of Exodus starts out right away. These are the names of the son of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each coming with his household. So we have names of people and their households. We have families coming to Egypt, not just individuals. We started in the book of Genesis with individuals, and each individual actually formed a family. And now we have all of the families coming into Egypt. And right away, the Israelites were fertile and prolific. They multiplied and increased greatly, so the land was filled with them. So there's all these Hebrew families, right, living in Egypt. And this did not bode well with the king of Egypt. Suddenly, he no longer knows Joseph, who did so much for his nation, but no longer does the king know Joseph, who had, just as we know, saved all the families of Egypt and all the families of the nations. But quickly he forgot, and now he has a desire to find a solution to the problem of the Israelites and all of their families, and they're multiplying and becoming numerous. So as we know, his first plan was to set taskmasters over them so that they would have to work all hours, and they would have to do forced labor and build the cities, garrison cities, and they were oppressed. And they were set out to work in many different labors and with a bitter life where they just had to do all sorts of tasks out in the field. So this first plan of Pharaoh to destroy the Israelites was to destroy the family, was to destroy the Jewish family, to have the husbands work in the fields with this backbreaking labor, and they would be certainly too tired in the end of the day to have intimate relations and to reproduce. So this Pharaoh's plan to just give them this unceasing toil was a plan to destroy the family. But we know from the Torah and from the Midrash that the women would not allow this to happen, and they would actually go to the fields later, even after their husbands did this backbreaking work. The women would go out to the fields. They would make themselves look pretty. They would have, look in their mirrors and make themselves look pretty. And they would come out and they would entice their husbands after work so that they would continue to build this generation. The women knew how essential this was. And the men, of course, probably knew it too, but they were too backbreakingly tired to give it any thought beyond that. But because of the efforts of the women, the people kept reproducing, and then Pharaoh had to go to his next plan, which was the horrible plan of sending the firstborns out on the river to die. So we see that first episode of Pharaoh's plan to destroy the family. And interestingly, we see over the years of our existence in the world how now too, this is always God's plan to have the families, and he created the world as Adam and Eve, and he had this beautiful plan. He had everything set up. Yeah, I like when we make the challah too. Everything was, okay, let me just continue with that theme of family. So today too, we see that we live in a society where the family is being broken down, and we see a society where both women and men work very long hours. I live in Japan. The society is very, very, very geared towards work, and there's no break, there's no rest for the people. And this also is is an attempt by, we can see it also by the enemy to break down the family. The enemy, Pharaoh was at that time, and continually throughout history has wanted to destroy the family, which is God's people. The idea for God, for his people, to live with families and in peace. But the enemy's goal has always been to break down the family and to produce disharmony and fragmentation in families and lead to the opposite of peace, which is incompleteness and unwholeness. When we look at God's plan for Shabbat is to bring the family together and to bring all his people together and to have a day of rest in him. So I find that section in the Exodus about the family and the antithesis of it to God's plan is what I wanted to address today before we make the Challah. And so I wanted to also emphasize how when we do set out to enter into God's Shabbat, how he makes it also clear. We just read in the book of Genesis about, we go from Genesis to the Exodus, and in Genesis, God created the world in such a beautiful way that he set everything up. The first day he gave us light, and then he separated the waters, and then he provided all the things for us over the next part of the creation. He provided the seed-bearing. I think of some of the ingredients that we use in Challah, the seed-bearing trees that produce fruits. We have the oil. He gave us the land where we grow the wheat and the flour, and then he gave us the birds that fly in the air. So we have the eggs that we use in the Challah. So when I did my first Challah-Cast about Genesis, I talked about that, how he laid everything out, and then on the sixth day he created us, man, and then that was after everything was done. And then on the seventh day, it was the day that we were going to rest with him, and he created man and he created woman, of course, and they have the first family, and that we were going to, all the family would rest with God on the Shabbat. Such a beautiful plan that has never changed over the generations. So when we look at the peace that God wants to bring to us on this special day that he appointed in time, we see also, even when the Israelites are set free, that one of the first things he does when he gives the bread, when he sends the manna down from heaven, which also we can relate to the Shabbat Challah in many ways, but when he sends the manna down from heaven, and maybe actually we'll talk about that the manna and the relation with Challah, we could talk about that in next week's. But today I just wanted to talk about how he set that up with the Shabbat. Again, during the week, the people would have to go out and gather the manna, and then on the seventh day, and it was just the sixth day before the seventh day, God would provide double portion of the manna, so that, again, actually everyone, it was command to stay inside. You had to stay inside with your family. You couldn't do any work, and that was how he set it up from the very beginning of when the people were set free. So I just wanted to point out today that contrast between the world who desires to break up the family with this backbreaking labor that we still have in our societies. I see it now as my daughter's growing up, and it concerns for me that to see her going out into that society where the world does not build in a day of rest, and God builds in this beautiful day of Shabbat, this day of rest. So as we make our Challah today, I just want to pray a peace over you and your family as you get ready to enter into God's special time, as we remember that he gave us this special time to rest in him, to restore our relation with our families, to gather around with our families, and to bring, he brings his shalom into the Shabbat by it being the day that he invites us to join him at his table. So I just want to bless you today and ask you to bless me on this Shabbat as we ask the Lord to help us to seek him as we agree with his plan for restoration of families. And I am an advocate for Shabbat, for God's Shabbat, which he commands and sets out very beautifully and clearly, as we said, from the very first days of creation. So I am here to just say Shabbat Shalom. God bless you.